There's inflation, there's recession, and then there's depression. There's probably some other things that end in on that I don't know, but I know those three. But there's one thing that has remained undefeated throughout all of that. And this thing is still at the same price in my generation now. And it's called talk. Talk has remained at the same price today that it has been for previous generation. Cheap. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. Even dating back to the days of Jesus, when one of his prospective disciples, or somebody with potential to be a disciple, came and said, Jesus, I want to follow you, Master. I see the miracles. I see the power. I see the rema. I see the word. I must to serve this Jesus. I must to serve this Jesus. But then Jesus looked at him and said, are you sure? He said, foxes have holes. Animals get where they stay, but me, I don't too. Another person came and said, Lord, I will follow you, but let me go and bury my papa first. Jesus, I love Jesus. Jesus now said, follow me first and let the dead bury their dead. He said, do what you have said first. Follow me. Let the dead bury their dead. Do what you have said. Do it. Because talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. The cost of discipleship is quite expensive. Talk is cheap. Even Paul had to pray and say, hold on, let me find that verse where he said it. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 9:27. 1 Corinthians 9, verses 27. It says, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Even Paul said it, that talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. He said, after I finish talking, and I come and be disqualified. Talk is cheap. Jesus said it, Paul said it, and it's been the same. It's been at inflation has not overcome talk. Recession has not overcome talk. Depression has not overcome talk. Even during the time of the Great Depression, people were still talking about how depressing it was. Even when there's economic recession, your politicians will still talk. During COVID, CDC, WHO, we still talk. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. Talk is so affordable, and it has a very compelling power that makes everybody want to do it. Now, to go beyond talk and now do what you have said. That's the difference is the price, is the cost. The difference between doing what you have said is the cost, is the cost, is the cost. Talk is cheap. Inflation cannot beat talk. It remains cheap. Talk is cheap. And that's why we pray and we beg God for mercy that God help us to live what we have said. Help us. Help us. Nobody is perfect. Yes, we know. But there is grace that abounds to make sure that you don't fall. That you don't preach all the right things, you don't say all the right things, and then you end up doing the wrong. And talk is cheap because, and talk is cheap, but the consequences are very expensive. People will not forgive you, even if you've done 1,001 things, especially if you're in the public eye. Do one bad thing. Men will not forget. Even if they forgive, they will not forget. Talk is cheap. Sometimes we can only just sit and wonder how God does it, how God remains faithful to what he has said. When you understand that talk is cheap, you will now understand the faithfulness of God to his word. You will now understand the call to faithfulness on your own part, to also do what he has said. Willie Akani said that leadership is not about you telling people what to do. He said, as a leader, you are not fit to tell people to do anything you have not done yourself. He said, that's not leadership. Leadership is you doing, then others can follow you and do as you have done. It's not do as I say, don't do as I do. Because talk is cheap. Talk remains cheap. Inflation can't defeat talk. Economic recession can't defeat talk. Everybody will just be talking. But now to do as you have said, that's when you learn the cost. Jesus said, count the cost. Before you build, count the cost. You've talked about building. You've talked with the architects. You've talked with all the bricklayers. You've talked with all the construction companies. Now, to go and actually build, to go and break ground, that's where the price comes in. Talk is cheap. Talk is very cheap. Very, very cheap. Very cheap. Everybody can afford it. Cheap. It's always on sale. It's always on clearance. You can get it on clearance. It's always on sale. You know, you don't have to do too much to get talk. But you might have to do a lot. Even Paul said, I discipline my body because talk is cheap. Your own words should actually constrain you. Your own, not the one you got from your own words should constrain you. And sometimes people that know this will rather just not say anything so that they can live carelessly and or carefree and just do whatever they want to do. But talk is cheap. As I meet, I pray that prayer and I'll say it again that Lord, at the end of the day, it's not about good preaching, it's not about good teaching. Help me to live what I have said. Help me to also live out your written word. Help me. Because talk is cheap. It's when you understand that talk is cheap, then you'll understand what the Bible means when it says that God is not a man that he should lie. Everything he said, he has done. Everything, literally. There's no human being with that kind of record. Because God knows talk is cheap. Just talking. Talk is cheap. It's very, very cheap. Talk is cheap. And as a leader, a good leader, if you're talking more than you are doing, you will soon understand that you are not God and that your own words will come back to you void because talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. It's easy to pray, but now go and obey the commands you got to the place of prayer. It's easy to talk, but now practice what you preach. That's kind of very hard. Now be disciplined by your own words.